I walk into the locker room and I close my eyes and I try to like hide and, not be seen by anyone.
Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm very excited today because I have Sruti Swaminathan with me, who is the senior staff attorney with the LGBTQ and HIV project at the ACLU. And we're going to be talking all about this case that is coming up called West Virginia versus B.P.J. And it's all about allowing transgender kids to play sports. So Sruti, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Emily. I'm so happy to be here and to connect on this issue and to tell you more about our case and our clients.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So I kind of prefaced this a bit. I fucked up and I don't have a beer with me. It's because I was busy watching people move and I forgot to steal a beer from their fridge. So I am just drinking an iced tea. So please forgive me. What are you drinking?
So I am a bit more fun than you today, and I am drinking an Oberon Eclipse. It's a Bell's beer from Michigan, which is where I currently am for the holidays. And so I'm going
going to Michigan tomorrow.
No way. Yeah. That's where my spouse is from. And so I'm a big Bell's fan. So here is my actual beer for proof for the viewers.
You're really showing me up. So thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
And you have a fun glass and everything too.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of podcast host am I? Okay, the question I always love to ask my guests is, why should we trust what you have to say?
That's a great question. As you said, I'm a senior staff attorney with the ACLU's LGBTQ and HIV project. I've been litigating civil rights issues for almost 5 years now, previously at Lambda Legal, now at the ACLU. And prior to that, I was a litigator at a law firm based in New York for 4 years. And, so I have the litigation experience, but I honestly think my lived experience as a trans person also informs my advocacy. This is my community that has been under relentless attack over the last 5 years, and especially this past year. And defending our rights under the Constitution makes it all the more personal for me as an attorney. So that's why I'm here today, to share with you all what I can about the case, but also about how you can show up for trans people, both at the Supreme Court in January and well beyond this fight.
I am so happy to have you. So happy to have you.
Appreciate that.
So why don't you fill us in on the case a bit? What's going on?
Yeah. So to put it as simply as possible, this case is about a state law, West Virginia's HB 3293, that categorically bars trans girls from participating on girls' and women's sports teams from secondary school through higher ed. And we filed this lawsuit in 2021 on behalf of one transgender girl, Becky Pepper Jackson, who at the time was about to start middle school and was seeking to play on her school's cross-country and track teams. Becky's just like any other teenage girl. She loves spending time with her friends. She is a straight A killer student. She's active in her school's marching band, but she's also transgender. She's known that she's a girl since a very young age, and she was diagnosed with gender dysphoria in 2019, but she was assigned a male sex at birth. But she has never experienced her endogenous puberty, which is the puberty associated with your birth sex. And she's never experienced any of the physiological changes that are typical of a male puberty, because she started puberty delaying medication at the start of her puberty, and she's continued in her treatment plan to taking hormones now that allows her to undergo a typically female puberty. And so she has lived her life as the girl she is since she was about 3 years old. And when it came time to try out for school sports, it was a no-brainer for her that the girls' team is the only team that she could participate on. It would completely erase who she is to play on the boys' team. She is not a boy. And, this law coming into effect in 2021 was absolutely devastating to her. And so West Virginia passed HB 3293 in the spring of 2021. And, it bars Becky from even participating on no-cut teams like cross-country or intramural sports, whether there's no even a trophy or any competition like prize. And so you can just see how overbroad this law is to bar every single trans girl from every single, level of competition, and only precluding them from being able to reap all the benefits of school sports in general. At the time the case was filed, Becky was 11, right? And so I think that just shows how overbroad and sweeping this type of law is. And the only purpose of it is to make sure that trans kids are excluded from sports altogether. And so, we filed this lawsuit, and at the start of the case in the district court, they agreed with us. They thought that it was unconstitutional for Becky to be barred from participating like this. And so she was able to obtain an injunction from the court to try out for cross country in fall of 2021, and absolutely loved participating and made friends and, did all the things that kids do.
And I love that for her because I did cross country
You
and it
did.
was a miserable experience. So I'm happy she's happy.
Yeah. And, I think another component of this is that, bless her, she is a wonderful kid and generally like good at sports, but not that good, right? She was finishing in the back of the pack in cross country her entire season. And when it came, time to try out for spring track, her coach told her that she was too slow to make the team for running and that she would need to try other sports if she even wanted to make the team. And so I put that out there for the viewers because I think, there's so much in the media about, trans women dominating sports and, all the examples are like, 2 or 3 trans women who participated like 6 years ago. And, they have no evidence to show that there's any sort of, concern about overtaking women's sports in the way that it's like posited in these headlines. And so I think it's also important to note that the record in this case reflects that Becky is the only transgender athlete to whom HB 3293 even applies. So you have West Virginia passing this law categorically banning kids from sports, but really all it does is kick one 15-year-old girl out of school sports. And
That's crazy. Can you imagine the amount of money spent to put this law into place for one girl?
Completely.
Because she just wants to run cross country. I mean, it's kind of insane.
Right. And
it's crazy.
The priorities of this administration have been made very clear, but I think it's even more clear to me that our opponents think of sports as sort of the issue to make all of the other sort of issues that impact the way in which we navigate life crumble. Like, for example, they've attacked our ability to get accurate passports. They've attacked our healthcare access. And especially for young people, they've attacked their ability to even come to school as who they are. And so obviously this is part of a broader agenda, and sports is sort of, the issue that's focused in on right now in front of the Supreme Court. But there's a clear agenda, and this administration has made it very clear that the erasure of trans people is sort of their goal. And so I think it's really important that I speak with you and that our clients' stories are elevated right now so that we're not lost in that erasure process.
Just a friendly reminder for people, it is textbook politics to pick something and someone and some type of topic that people are unaware of, raise all this fear about it in order to unite a voting bloc. Like, that is textbook politics. So y'all are being played.
And I would love to highlight that, Emily, exactly what you said. Look in Virginia this year, the Republican candidates ran on completely anti-trans platforms and they lost the AG seat, they lost the governor's seat. And so this playbook isn't working. And perhaps, some folks have some appreciation for the issues raised by our opponents in the context of sports, but I don't think it extends generally to the ability of trans people to be ourselves in other aspects of life. And that's why I think it's important to tell Becky's story in this case specifically and talk about her healthcare and all of what she's been through to be who she is. And then, for when people say, why can't she just play on the boys' team? She's not barred from school sports. She can play on the boys' team. That's not an option for her. It's inconsistent with who she is. It's contrary to her medical treatment, which, encourages that she be, referred to, viewed as, and live as the girl that she is in all contexts of her life. You can't just rip school out of that. And, she's a completely different person at school because, the state has decided that their priorities are to kick her and only her off her school track team. I'm in awe of our clients, but especially, in this case, I'm in awe of our client who, especially, when it comes to an as-applied challenge, and for your viewers, an as-applied challenge means any relief we're seeking is only on behalf of her. We're not challenging sex separation in sports. We're challenging the categorical exclusion of a group of people from sports in its entirety because, we know what the benefits of sports are. As you said, your experiences in cross country. Unfortunately, I wasn't very athletic for much of my,
I wasn't either,
no.
But yes.
But I did play ping pong on my college team, and I just know what it's like to be on a team, to make friends, and to be told that you're the only one who doesn't get to do that is a hard pill to swallow.
It's awful. And it's so hard being that age, no matter what. And to just feel like you have a target on your back, I can only imagine what she goes through every day.
Totally.
Truly. So, a lot of this there's a lot of different arguments that come from the, I would say, opposing anti-trans side, right? And a lot of the concerns say it's unfair or there's a biological disadvantage. What is your argument against that?
Yeah, I think as any competitive athlete can tell you, I think all athletes carry advantages and disadvantages depending on the sport, depending on their background, their experience, their genetics, their physical ability. I think excluding trans girls on the basis of advantages that they may or may not have, while ignoring the wide varieties of body types and physical ability among all women, is both discriminatory to trans girls, and it relies on very old, like archaic stereotypes of women as inherently petite and weak. And I think, anyone who watches women's sports can tell you that is so far from the truth. And it's also not the case that every body type possesses an advantage in every sport. What makes someone great at basketball is so different than what makes them great at sprinting or cross country or, a great gymnast. There's not a one size fits all body that is advantageous in all sports. And I also want to encourage people to keep the context here front and center. We're talking about a 15-year-old girl playing a non-contact sport, finishing in the back of the pack for cross-country running. Like I said before, she was too slow to make the team for track, so her coaches encouraged her to try out for shot put and discus. And through her hard work and practice, she eventually improved enough in shot put and discus to participate in the competitive events. But her performance was in the range of her cisgender peers, girls her age. And Becky alone suffers from being excluded from athletics under HB 3293. And I think the other interesting component here is that, we didn't pick this fight at the Supreme Court, right? Our opponents have sought the Supreme Court's review twice. The first time they failed. The second time it was granted this year on my birthday on July 3rd, 2025. It was a wonderful gift for me to hear that the cert petition had been granted. But it's very clear that, they're using sports to enact a broader agenda of, sort of eroding our rights under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, which is under the 14th Amendment, and in this case under Title IX, which is the federal statute prohibiting discrimination in federally funded programs. And so, when people talk about advantage, I think we have to be, really careful because, this isn't the case of an extreme outlier athlete performing, outperforming every girl. She's a regular teenage girl who is seeking to perform, and she's never experienced her endogenous puberty. So, the talk about advantage and circulating testosterone levels, which are the primary indicator of advantage, she has similar circulating testosterone levels as her cisgender peers. And the other sort of reason I raise the posture that we're in, that our opponents have sought, cert here, is because we believe that they did that prematurely. There is an open question of fact in this case, whether girls like Becky, who have never experienced endogenous puberty and suppressed testosterone, have any advantage. The district court and the Fourth Circuit issued their rulings without making any conclusions as to that, open fact. And they sought Supreme Court review here while, both sides have put in expert testimony that has never been evaluated by the lower courts. And so, at every, stage of this, this petition should not have been granted. It's not the right stage of this case. We're on a preliminary injunction. This case impacts one trans girl. It's very surprising to me that they took the case, especially so soon after LW versus Scrimeti, US v. Scrimeti, when it reached the Supreme Court, which was, Tennessee's law banning gender-affirming medical care access for young people. And so it just signals to me that, it was never really about sports. And I think it continues today to not really be about sports when you think of the sheer low number of trans athletes there even are. I think there's, the NCAA director saying there's less than 10 out of 500,000 athletes. Like, what are we doing here, right? This is
such a waste of time.
It's truly, and like the harm here is so real. I think people don't realize like how much young people, are already like, facing in school. Like, do you remember being a student? Like, damn,
oh my God,
was
it's
tough.
horrific. My stepsister's 9 years old and I'm constantly horrified by what she shares with me.
Yeah,
it's awful.
It's just not easy. And so now you're also telling this young girl that, she can't be with her friends and she needs to be ostracized and others. And she's the only one who has to sort of wear this scarlet T around her neck. It's really horrible. And so, I just encourage people to sort of, take a step back, look at the scope of what we're talking about here, that these are young people who just want the same opportunities as their friends. And, this discussion about advantage, I think, is just the grossly sort of spoken about in the media as, like one size fits all. And that's just not the case. And I think, again, it's important to remind folks that, this isn't a challenge to sex separation in sports. West Virginia previously had a policy that allowed trans students to participate on a case-by-case basis. If there were any concerns about fairness and safety, the school had a protocol to evaluate that and make that call and decide whether a young person should be allowed to compete or not, taking in sort of the totality of fairness. And, I think our opponents often say that, we're trying to bring down the system and make it so that, all women's teams are co-ed. And that's just simply not the case and not the reality of what's happening.
Everything's been so blown out of proportion.
Totally. And I think it's important to also talk about the consequences of bans like this to cisgender women and girls too. These blanket sports bans are bad for all women and girls. I think enforcing this type of policy could require young girls to answer really invasive personal questions about things like their menstrual cycle or even undergo physical inspections if they want to play sports. That's a major violation of privacy. And I think it would concern many parents, because it would potentially open the door for more abuse in women's athletics. And I think we're already seeing the effects of this. We've seen this begin to play out. I don't know if you read about the female basketball player in Utah who faced a slew of online hate after a Republican official falsely accused her of being trans because of
I
her
remember the
larger
boxer
build.
from the Olympics as well.
Another example, this type of gender policing could happen to any female athlete because of their height or their hair length or athletic build or, even how they dress. And so I think everyone should be worried about the potential to be surveilled like this for potentially deviating from what people typically think of a man and a woman as.
So you mentioned this a little bit, but gender affirming care is what everyone's talking about these days.
Yeah.
And the Trump admin has a massive vendetta against it. And it is so harmful. And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about gender affirming care.
Yeah.
Can you provide some clarity about what people get wrong?
Yeah. I mean, the first is how young people go about accessing gender affirming care. I think it's, a trope that our opponents have pushed that it's like a conveyor belt to care that, you go from blockers to hormones to surgery before age 5. None of that is happening, right? Surgery is extremely rare for any young people under 18. And if it does happen within the 16, 17, 18 window, it's in the form of top surgery. We're not talking about, genital surgery on minors. And so that is one big misconception that I think if folks, understood that point, maybe there would be some easing up on the resistance or the attacks on our care. I think the other thing is that parental consent is involved for accessing care. It's required. These kids aren't accessing care without the full consent and understanding of their families. Their providers spend so much time with a young person before even diagnosing them. And then, after that, it's the prescription of treatment. But no young person is accessing medical care before the start of puberty. At the start of puberty, they may access puberty delaying treatment, which is a pause on puberty, right? And, those the effects of taking that treatment, most of the effects are reversible as well. And so if they later decide that they change their mind, that is completely fine. I think there's also crazy misinformation about the rates of desistance. It's around 1% of young people desist. And I think our opponents are flouting statistics 80% of young people when they're really talking about, pre-puberty kids perhaps changing their mind. But they're not talking about post-puberty when young people are the most terrified of going through these physical changes that are completely inconsistent with who they are. I also think medical care, taking medical care at a young age could prevent the need for surgical care and other more invasive gender affirming care later in their life. And, we know the care works. This is life-saving care. The young people, talk to them, talk about how much more confident they become. When I talk to parents with trans young people, especially because, I came out much later in life. And so I did not get to access medical care when I was younger. And so just seeing parents talk about a light switch turning on in their kids' brains and minds and seeing them become way more integrated into their social circles and way more attentive at school, I would just it's breaking my heart seeing the federal attacks on care and, going after providers who are just doing their jobs to provide this care when you have, folks without an ounce of medical expertise legislating away our access. It should raise alarm bells that it's not coming from medical professionals. And in most cases, it's coming, after medical professionals have testified for hours against these bills, saying that this is going to wreak havoc on the lives of young people. And so, it's a full storm. And, in terms of like how it plays into the sports context, before these categorical bans, several states had, either 1 year or 2 year suppression requirements for, being able to participate for trans women suppressing their testosterone. And now you've made it impossible for young people to access care and even meet those types of requirements. So it's just it's cascading, of ways to chip away at our ability to find safe spaces and to be a part of we are a fabric of this society, right? And this administration, putting out an EO saying we don't exist is not going to change that.
I am 100% totally agree. And I went on a road trip last week to like top Trump counties and to try to talk to a lot of Trump voters and kind of just see what their thought process is between supporting him. And obviously, people had a lot of questions about, I think one person called it transgenderation. And I said, that's not a word, but that's okay.
I need a sip of beer for that. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's like, the transgenderation. And I was like, good try, buddy. And I just tried to explain, one, existing in this world is so difficult.
Yeah.
And I am a cis woman and my hormones are already crazy. That the thought process, like the thought behind having either just fuck with my hormones in some way would make me go insane, that I can only imagine that a person would do it because it is so necessary for their survival.
Absolutely. And, beyond that, it's also like, I think this idea that, people transition to get access to other spaces and, have like nefarious agendas is so crazy to me. Like I walk into the locker room and I close my eyes and I try to like hide and, not be seen by anyone. Like it's just these really harmful stereotypes about who we are. And they are ugly. Like our opponents are not afraid of saying, really ugly, really hurtful things. And I think folks don't understand like what a harmful impact that has on young people. Like I'm an adult and I feel, very perturbed by the things that are being said, but these young people are absorbing this content too, and it's extremely harmful. And I think, it shouldn't take like having a trans child or having a close trans friend to acknowledge our existence and respect us at bare minimum. And we're just seeing the complete opposite here, right? I think it's so clear that the past few years have not been good years in terms of the rights of trans folks. And there's just been attacks at the state level. And with this new administration, we have the entire federal government focused on rolling back the rights and recognition of us. And, I think that's obviously the context in which all of this is unfolding. Like this is a follow-up case to the Scrimetti decision. And the Supreme Court issued a really disappointing ruling on the specific issue of medical care. But, that opinion was written in a narrower way, addressing, the specific issue of medical context. And the court made clear that it wasn't addressing larger questions about discrimination against trans people and whether it's, constitutional or not in other contexts. And so I think, in one sense, this is a narrow case about sports, which is a pretty discrete context. But the real danger is that the people passing these laws and defending these laws would love to use the sports case as a springboard for a broad decision that says more generally that trans people don't have meaningful protections under the Constitution or under Title IX. And so that's the sort of fear at play here. And, we're ready to make our argument in court on January 13th. But I hope people know that there's a broad, community that is supportive of us and wants trans folks to have the rights that we deserve under law and wants, like, could you imagine also like the government coming into any other family and with a young person with a different diagnosis and saying, I'm actually going to categorically bar you from being able to get your child that treatment for that diagnosis.
Fucking nuts,
It's
especially for
nuts.
the people that scream so much about keeping government out of your lives.
Yeah, the same
Like,
folks
make
who are
it
like,
make sense.
my kids shouldn't be wearing a mask at school or shouldn't have to be vaccinated. Those cases that made their way to the Supreme Court, now we're in the complete inverse posture where it's like, yes, please go intrude into people's private family decision making and, rip away their ability to access care that, is supported by the medical community in the United States, that people go to medical school for and get training on and have seen the impacts of. Like, that's where we are. It's a bit disheartening and worrying on that front, because I think people don't realize, if they're coming for us, it's certainly not, scots free for everyone else. Like, this is going to be an erosion of rights beyond just trans rights. And again, speaking to like the gender policing and other types of things, I think it's important for folks to be as vocal as they can in support of us, because I think that's, community preservation. I think it may make sure that all of us are safe and free from this type of governmental overreach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is just a friendly reminder that just because someone may just feel like they're seeing transgender people for the first time, transgender people have been part of the fabric of society for thousands and thousands of years. Like, this is nothing new. And society's society's fucked up in a lot of ways, but none of it is tied back to the existence of transgender people.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I'll see a piece of news in the media about some, war that's going to be started. And it's like, yes, it's because that trans person used that bathroom in Boston. Like, I couldn't be more like surprised by the ways, like the power that people think we have. It's just like, clearly we live rent free in their heads, but honestly, I don't, the call is not for visibility anymore. The call is to leave us alone, leave us the fuck alone. And, we can resume just being a part of society as we always have been. And I think, yeah, I totally agree with you, Emily.
I mean, it literally could not be easier. Your one request is just, please fuck off. Yeah. We just please leave us be.
Yeah.
Which is quite literally the bare minimum for anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So the case is coming up. How are you feeling about it?
We're feeling as ready as we can be. We are coming from a win in the lower court, and, we have the law on our side, and obviously the federal government is not on our side, and they have partners in the Alliance Defending Freedom and other organizations that are, sort of pushing this broader agenda of eroding civil rights protections for us. But I think, I never, like, if I didn't have optimism, like, would I be doing this job? No, I'd drive myself crazy. I'm ready to make the case in court in January. And I think the most important thing I try to remind myself is that we've had uphill fights before and we've won them. Like back when Bostock was decided, which was the decision that said that discrimination against LGBT people is sex discrimination under Title VII for employment purposes, a lot of people predicted we would lose those cases, and we didn't. And so, we must push forward here. We have to continue telling Becky's story no matter what, because it's important. I've been thinking a lot lately about the importance of a record. And even if we win or lose, the fact that this story was told and that Becky had her day in the highest court is extremely important. And again, this is not a fight we picked. And so we're kind of catapulted into the highest court, without much of a choice. But, we're there and we're prepared to vigorously defend our clients and trans people in general against all of these attacks. And as you know, we're litigating the healthcare bans and the passport ban and all kinds of things. And so this is just a confluence of events. But I think doing things like this and connecting with communities who want to learn more about who we are as trans people and, the specific issue of sports as well. We are so ready to have those difficult conversations with anyone who's willing to listen. And so, none of us know what the justices are going to do and, what the eventual opinion in June will look like. But what we do know is that young people deserve better from the federal government, from the Supreme Court, from everyone, from all of us. And it's our duty to not let them down. And so for me, that's sort of the guiding principle is, like, don't forget the larger context here. We've had losses before and we've had surprising wins. And so I'm just, ready to get this show on the road.
Well, I know Becky is very lucky to have you on their team.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And she's a badass. So I'm very
She seems
privileged
so
and
cool.
honored. She's so cool.
Yeah.
So much cooler than
You're
me.
like,
She keeps, she gives me one of these and I'm like, what?
stop.
That's nice. Like, what is that? And so,
You're like, I don't understand
yeah,
teenage internet culture, but thank you.
I'm becoming cooler by the minute between this beer podcast and my 15-year-old clients. So, thank you. Thank you again.
Living the dream. Shruti, is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think we've really hit on everything that I wanted to share. I think, the last message really is that there are people behind these cases. Like I said before, this case started with an 11-year-old girl who started middle school and wanted ways to meet people, make new friends, and be a part of a team. And stuff is playing out on this stage where some organizations have much broader agendas, but at the heart of the case, it's just about individual kids trying to live their lives. And so that's always something I want to remember audiences in cases like these.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate you.
And I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.